Welcome and thank you for joining us today for Desktop Virtualization, Emerging Requirements and Solutions. My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Our featured speaker is Steve Brasen, Managing Research Director at Enterprise Management Associates. Steve's career at EMA follows 20 years of experience in IT system support, engineering, and management for high technology, telecommunications, and financial institutions. And before I hand things over to Steve, I did want today's audience to know that Steve will be concluding his presentation by taking your questions. So I do encourage you to take the opportunity to log any questions you may have by using the Q&A functionality located in the right-hand column of your screen. Also, today's event is being recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email from EMA tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our featured speaker, Steve Brasen. Steve?
Hello, and thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Raleigh, for our presentation on the emerging requirements and solutions for desktop virtualization. EMA recently completed an in-depth study of organizations that have adopted desktop virtualization solutions, and I'm very delighted to be able to reveal for the first time some of the key findings from that research. Before we get started, I'd just like to take a moment to thank our sponsors for the research and for this presentation. Dell and Untitled Technology. As we strive to provide objective and independent analysis to consumers such as yourself, we just couldn't do that without the support of our sponsors. So a heartfelt thanks to the generous support from Dell and Untitled. First, here's a quick look at our agenda for this presentation. We'll start with a brief overview of desktop virtualization solutions in order to set the stage for our discussion. And then we'll dive right into reviewing the research results, starting with a look at desktop virtualization adoption. Who's using it? What kinds of virtualization are being used? How broadly is it being used within organizations and so forth? Next, we'll look at current practices for deployment and administration of desktop virtualization solutions, and we'll review some of the primary barriers to success that most often challenge organizations in the delivery of desktop virtualization services. We'll also reveal key data that suggests optimal management practices and solutions that should be adopted for enabling effective desktop virtualization solutions. And then we'll examine the overall outcomes experienced by desktop virtualization adopters. Is it easier or harder to manage the traditional environments, or is it really more cost-effective? And what is the actual level of satisfaction with the platforms? And finally, we'll sum it all up with some select conclusions on the research data. For those of you wondering where our research data points came from and how we did it, we developed and distributed a survey to IT professionals across a wide range of industry verticals and horizontals. Respondents were carefully vetted to ensure they had detailed knowledge of their organization's desktop virtualization environment, management, and use. And in total, the survey netted 156 respondents, the majority of which were IT directors, IT executive managers, and IT administrators responsible for desktop virtualization operations. While respondents did represent a broad range of business types, we did place a few survey quotas to ensure we had sufficient respondents to enable statistically relevant breakouts in three key industry areas: healthcare, education, and financial institutions. Now, these three were chosen based on results from numerous other surveys that indicated these industries are the largest adopters of desktop virtualization solutions. So let's start from the beginning. What the heck is this desktop virtualization thing after all? Well, here's the academic definition. Desktop virtualization is a software technology that abstracts a desktop environment and associated applications from the hardware and or operating system of the client device used to access it. Most business users are principally only familiar with traditional monolithic PC environments, Windows most commonly, maybe Macs, where the operating system and the desktop appear to be seamlessly bundled together. But those are actually two different things. Now, put simply, an operating system provides the interface between software and the underlying hardware architecture, while a desktop is the interactive environment users employ to access the applications. there's actually no reason these two need to be in the same environment or completely connected the way we're used to them. What desktop virtualization does is to layer a unique work environment on top of whatever is available on the local environment. Now, most typically, virtual desktops are actually hosted in a back office system and then served up to the end user devices. There's actually many different types of desktop virtualization. Listed here are the most common. Topping the list is VDI, or Virtual Desktop Infrastructure. In fact, this approach has become so popular that the term VDI is often used interchangeably with desktop virtualization. But as you'll see, this is actually inaccurate, as desktop virtualization encompasses a broader range of technologies. With VDI, individual virtual desktops are hosted and run on back-office servers and then displayed on end-user devices. So this is a one-to-one relationship where each user gets their own unique virtual desktop. With stateless desktop virtualization, desktop configurations are not unique. They are the same for every user. Now, this is actually the oldest type of desktop virtualization, dating way back to the early days of mainframes, and is sometimes referred to as terminal services, or more commonly today as remote desktop services. But the common differentiator here is that this is a one-to-many relationship. All users access a common environment as compared to VDI, where each user has their own unique environment. The most popular desktop virtualization packages, including Citrix Zen Desktop, Dell vWorkspace, and VMware Horizon View, support both VDI and stateless desktop virtualization configurations. Common to both of those approaches, though, is that they both the desktop and any applications on the desktop run on the back office servers, and again, they're just displayed on the endpoint. All central processing, memory, graphics processing, it all happens on the servers. The endpoints, whether it's a PC or a tablet or a thin client or whatever, essentially just displays the image on the desktop. By contrast, with client-hosted desktop virtualization, desktops are hosted centrally on the back-office server, but are run on the endpoints. So the chief advantage of client-hosted desktop virtualization is that it allows endpoints to access virtual desktops even when they are not connected to the network. They have offline capabilities. But of course, the trade-off here is that you lose the performance advantages of centralized server processing in the back office. Popular client-hosted desktop virtualization packages include Citrix Zen Client, Dell Wise WSM, VMware Mirage, and also the formerly Mocha 5, which unfortunately recently ceased operations due to apparently financial difficulties. But it was a popular package before that. Commonly considered a subset of desktop virtualization are application virtualization solutions. The traditional form works very much like stateless desktop virtualization, but only serves up applications. So that is, an application is run on the back office servers and made accessible to many users. These solutions include Citrix XenApp, Microsoft AppV, and VMware ThinApp. With application streaming, apps are hosted on servers, but portions of the code are streamed to the endpoint to run locally on them as needed. So in this way, you don't have to wait for the entire application to download from the servers before you can use it. You just get the pieces you need to function, and the rest is automatically called and downloaded when required. 2X Application Server and Novell ZenWorks Application Virtualization are examples of that particular approach. And one final technology of note is Desktop as a Service, or DaaS for short. Now, when any of the solutions mentioned on the previous slide are hosted in a public cloud environment, it is called a DaaS solution. Now, I will tell you that we are seeing increased interest in DaaS adoption, particularly with small and medium-sized businesses. Now, that's because organizations with limited budgets typically cannot afford the upfront expense of purchasing infrastructure to support a full desktop virtualization deployment. And they're also challenged with hiring knowledgeable support staff to maintain the environment. Now, for these businesses, DaaS provides the best of both worlds, the ability to take advantage of desktop virtualization benefits without the cost and management overhead. Popular solutions for this include Citrix DaaS, Dell Workspace as a Service, and VMware's Horizon Air, which was formerly known as Destone. And here is our first data point. The majority of organizations that have adopted desktop virtualization solutions, that's 65% according to our data, they did so within the last 2 years. Now, that's actually an extraordinary number considering that the reigning technologies have actually been around for decades. And it really exemplifies the increasing rates of adoption. I should also point out that this trend appears consistent when we looked across data across individual industry verticals and horizontals. So this isn't just one particular demographic skewing this data. This trend is happening everywhere. It's an increase in adoption in desktop virtualization. Breaking that same data out by organizational size, that is the number of employees in each respondent's company. You can see also that there is a general trend for more recent adoption by smaller organizations. Much of this trend is driven by the increased availability of DaaS solutions, as mentioned before, and also the fact that smaller enterprises have, until recently, largely been the greenfield for desktop virtualization. So there's really lots of opportunity for growth there. Here we can see the primary drivers for desktop virtualization adoption. Reducing IT management costs tops the list, and for good reason. When all desktops are centrally located on back-office servers, they become much easier to manage and update. For instance, patches and updates do not need to be packaged, scheduled, and distributed. And remote management becomes unnecessary as administrators can just log on to any desktop locally on the servers and then repair any problems. Similarly, security and compliance are easier to maintain by only having to apply policies and applications to applications and data on internal office servers rather than distributed to external remote endpoints. Looking at the types of desktop virtualization solutions adopted, we can see that application virtualization slightly edges out other types of virtualization as the most commonly employed. This chart shows the mean average percentage of employees that are actively using each type of virtualization among those organizations that have adopted them. As you can see, overall adoption rates average at about a quarter of an organization's size, which is quite impressive. In general, application virtualization tends to be more popular with smaller organizations, while VDI, stateless, and client-hosted desktop virtualization were adopted by more frequently by employee percentages with higher organizations. To help gauge the effects of enterprise mobility on desktop virtualization usage, we asked respondents to identify the percentage of each endpoint device type regularly used to access virtual desktops in their organization. While desktops and laptops, the purple and green lines respectively, continue to dominate as the chief desktop virtualization access points, mobile device use was surprisingly high. Roughly 30% of desktop and application virtualization access is initiated from a mobile device, which is a smartphone or a tablet. This reflects a natural trend that has been slowly building for some time. With the push towards enabling BYOD, bring your own device initiatives, in enterprise mobile devices, people forget that desktop virtualization has been delivering BYOD to desktops for decades. Think about it. When desktop virtualization, desktop virtualization, enterprise resources, those are apps, data, email, and other services, they're all managed and secured centrally and kept completely separate from a user's local resources. That's the very definition of BYOD requirements. In fact, containers, which are increasingly being employed to support BYOD, are actually derivatives of virtualization. The only real difference is that a container doesn't sit on a hypervisor. So it is not OS agnostic. A Windows container will only work on a Windows system, and an Android container will only work on an Android device. A virtual desktop, however, can be hosted on any device. delivering broader flexibility. Switching gears to deployment and administration, we asked respondents to identify who initially deployed their desktop virtualization solutions. While internal IT technical support continues to dominate implementation processes, as you can see, there is a consistent trend towards reversing that. Increasingly, external professional services and software integrators and managed service providers have been employed to implement solutions. This trend is at least partly due to the fact that small organizations with limited IT support resources are increasingly adopting desktop virtualization solutions. As for the architecture of the server environment, the most common hosting environment for virtual desktops are virtualized servers. Ranking second were private clouds. But since private clouds are effectively always virtualized, you can really add those two numbers together and make an honest statement that 65% of desktop virtualization implementations are hosted on virtualized servers. Now, conversely, only 17% of organizations hosted their deployments on standalone servers. Since all processing in VDI and application virtualization solutions are performed in the server environments, it is very advantageous to adopt technologies that improve server efficiency. So listed here are a few key solutions employed to maximize desktop virtualization efficiency. And topping the list is the automated load balancing of servers, which is often employed as part of a clustered environment. Followed closely behind is workload automation, which can be used to balance loads at a software level, moving virtual desktops and stored data off of heavily used servers and onto lightly used or more cost-effective servers. Concurrent licensing allows multiple users to share common licenses as long as they don't use them at the same time. Now, for instance, in a follow-the-sun support environment, cloud bursting will allow virtual desktops to be moved or spawned to in a remote cloud when local server processing memory or storage resource thresholds have been exceeded. And linked clones are used in VDI deployments where some applications and services are commonly shared by multiple users, but each user still retains a unique desktop environment. So basically, linked clones can reduce license costs and simplify management by creating a single point of administration for common applications. There is no IT solution on the market today that is not without its challenges, and evaluating the viability of a solution means examining both the pros and the cons. And desktop virtualization is certainly no exception. To help identify barriers to success in supporting desktop virtualization environments, we asked respondents to identify the most difficult management processes for supporting, provisioning, and managing their organization's desktop virtualization environment. Storage management stands head and shoulders above all the others, and the most challenging management process. Ensuring storage capacities, high availability, and I/O performance all contribute to make storage management the most difficult support practice in managing desktop virtualization. Application performance management and overall capacity management also will notably high on this list. As I'm sure you're aware, there are a wide variety of IT management solutions on the market that assist either directly or indirectly with simplifying and optimizing desktop virtualization administration. Responders to our survey noted a broad adoption of a variety of these solutions. Most commonly noted were network management, virtual machine management, and security management solutions. By comparing that list of adopted management platforms with each respective responder's identified number of problems per month, we were able to identify which management solutions provided the greatest benefit in supporting desktop virtualization. Now, the dark blue line at the bottom of the chart represents the average number of problems per month reported by organizations that had no management platforms whatsoever. So we can consider that to be a baseline to compare against. And as you can see, the adoption of any of the management platforms can have a profound effect on reducing the number of failure events. Network management solutions in particular can dramatically improve desktop virtualization reliability. All desktop virtualization solutions rely on network connectivity, at least in part, to transfer data to and from the hosted servers. So leveraging network monitoring and management solutions will undoubtedly streamline performance. Correlating the adopted management solutions to the amount of time it takes to resolve failure events also indicates opportunities for management improvement. Now, again, the blue line at the bottom sets the baseline for the comparison. Organizations that adopted application performance monitoring, network management, and IT process automation solutions all achieved faster average times to resolution over the baseline. Despite the occasional management difficulties, the majority of organizations find the adoption of desktop virtualization has made administrative tasks easier over a distributed desktop environment. Now, this chart reflects the total aggregate responses to how organizations gauge the change in support tasks. The orange and blue fields, respectively, identify respondents that reported tasks were somewhat easier or much easier. So if you put those two together, you can see that the fields cross the 50% line in the center of the chart for every key management practice listed. Configuring and provisioning desktops were prominently recognized as easier to perform in virtual desktop environments. We also received overwhelming confirmation of the cost effectiveness of desktop virtualization. 95% of all respondents, and remember, these are all actual desktop virtualization adopters, 95% stated they had achieved measurable cost savings. Most commonly referenced was IT administrative support cost savings. However, references to software and hardware cost savings were not far behind. When focusing on business value, an increased business agility was most frequently noted, followed closely behind by increased desktop reliability and availability. Reducing the cost of operations also actually ranked third on the list, which was somewhat surprising considering, as you'll recall from earlier, reducing cost of operations was identified as the primary reason for adopting desktop virtualization in the first place. So it seems many use cases, organizations are finding more value from the solution than they originally expected. And having seen desktop virtualization solutions simplify management, reduce costs, and improve business performance in the majority of cases, it should be no surprise that there was a substantial overall satisfaction reported by responders for their adoption of desktop virtualization solutions. This chart segments those aggregated responses by organization size, which again is determined by the number of employees. In general, mid-sized organizations with between 500 and 10,000 employees reported the highest levels of satisfaction. But even in very small and very large organizations, overall satisfaction was indicated in the majority of cases. So, putting it all together, we're definitely seeing an increase in desktop virtualization adoption, particularly among smaller organizations. The principal management challenge for desktop virtualization is storage management, with also application performance management and capacity management being concerns. However, automated IT management platforms can significantly reduce challenges related to reliability and performance. And finally, we saw clear evidence that desktop virtualization adopters achieved improved IT management, measurable cost savings, increased business value, and overall satisfaction since the deployment of their desktop virtualization solutions. Now, this is just sort of a sample of the research data we got back. I think these highlighted the notes, but we did a much more detailed evaluation. I encourage you to check out the final research report when it's published later this week to get the detailed information that we couldn't provide in this brief presentation. And on that note, I'm going to turn it back over to Raleigh to lead us through the Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Steve. If you have any questions, you can log them now using the Q&A functionality. You should see that in the right-hand column of your screen. Steve, the first question is, will the upcoming introduction of Windows 10 have an effect on desktop virtualization adoption?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question because Windows 10 is supposed to be coming out end of July if Microsoft keeps its word to that. So we're right there. I mean, we're very close to that happening. New operating system versions, and particularly new Windows versions, always boost desktop virtualization adoption rates. Organizations that require the use of applications that are incompatible with the new operating system have only two choices. They can rebuild the applications, which is expensive and time-consuming, or they can deploy the software as virtual applications or virtual desktops. Now, while Windows 10 is reported to be fully compatible with Windows 8.1 and Windows 7 environments, apps cannot be ported to Windows 10 from Vista and XP. It's shocking, I know, but according to our data, roughly 15% of organizations are still using Windows XP. So this really will be a challenge for some folks, the adoption of Windows 10, and the need to migrate to Windows 10 will cause an increase in adoption of desktop virtualization technologies.
Thanks for that insight, Steve. We're almost at our time limit, so let's just take one more question. It is, how effective are SIs and MSPs in supporting desktop virtualization environments versus on-premise IT support?
Yeah, actually, according to our research, third-party support like the MSPs and SIs and professional services, they actually rated fairly poor in comparison to on-premise support. For example, the number of, and I'm looking at my data here, the number of environment failure events reported by IT technical support per month was less than 3. In fact, the number was actually just 2.8 failures per month for on-premise IT technical support. By contrast, third-party support averaged almost 5 failures per month. Actually, 4.7 on average is the actual number. The amount of time needed to resolve problems was also relatively long compared to on-site support. On average, IT support organizations resolved problems in about 38 minutes, while software integrators took twice as long, about 78 minutes, to resolve problems on average. Professional services and managed service providers fared somewhat better than SIs, 55 minutes and 41 minutes respectively on average. But they still didn't provide the same level of response as on-premise IT support. So that's something to keep in mind. There's certainly value in using third-party support. If you don't have internal technical knowledge to support the environment, then that's still a route you'll probably want to take. But in terms of average support times, our data showed that on-site, on-premise support is definitely superior to third-party.
Great, thank you. And that will conclude our event today. As I mentioned at the start, you will be receiving a follow-up email from EMA tomorrow that will include the playback of today's event and some additional resources. So be on the lookout for that. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.